Wanted to do a book review on a book that I read last year in 2025. I wanted to share my honest thoughts and opinions on this because I want to actually read the second book in the series at some point this year. And I just wanted to talk about my thoughts on the series, as well as I wanted to add this book to my new book journal that I started at the end of 2025. So, this book series, I believe, is fairly new. I think it was released last year in 2025 because that's kind of like when I started seeing a whole bunch of people talking about this. This series, from what I can tell from what I've seen, is basically explaining how the Disney characters or like the Disney magical creatures become the Disney magical creatures. So it explains like how they get their powers, all of that type of stuff. And I was like, I really want to read this because that sounds really, really cool. And this book is the first book. This one is all about the fairy godmother from Cinderella, which is actually my favorite Disney movie. And this book was absolutely amazing. I'm giving this 5 out of 5 stars. And I'm a very firm believer that when it comes to reading a book can be either a perfect length or a book can be a little bit like dragged on too long. This book, in my opinion, was just perfect in how like many pages it was, because it gave you a really good story, a really good backstory, but at the same time, it not only answered your questions, but it also cut to the chase, if that makes sense. And at the time that I was reading this book, I was not thinking that I would have a book YouTube channel. So I did not take note as to the day that I started the book or the day that I finished the book. So we're just going to go ahead and say fall, because I do know I read this in fall of last year. But I really, really liked it. And if you are a person who loves reading the backstory to characters, I will give this a go. There was nothing in this book. I will say, though, a little bit of a heads up. There was a part of this book that definitely made me cry a little bit, and it was when we found out why Cinderella's mother died, because this explains why her mother died also. That part I did kind of tear up on. And in all honesty, out of all the books that I have read over the course of my life, I think there's only one other book that actually made me cry to some degree. But yeah. And that book, ironically, happens to be my favorite book, which I do plan to make a video on at some point. Anyway, so I highly recommend this book. I love it. I thought it was written really great. I also thought it was really interesting to hold. Like, I know that's going to sound really strange, but this book was like a square book, if that makes sense. And I know that sounds kind of strange, but it's not like a typical shape of a book. And I thought that was really, really kind of cool. But yeah, so I have read quite a few like Disney themed books. I have read most of the Twisted Tales series, and then I've read some other books that were also like explaining like other points of views from like classic Disney movies, etc. And I have loved all of them. I love like learning the backstories of different characters. I think it's really, really fun. And I also really like it when a book answers like the questions that you have when you watch a movie and you're like, I wonder how this character became this, or how this character became the ability to do this. And it was kind of like for me when I watched Frozen for the first time, and I was like, why does Elsa have her ice powers? And then when I watched Frozen 2, it explained why she has her ice powers. And it made sense. And that's exactly what I felt like with this book. How did Cinderella's fairy godmother become a fairy godmother? And I'm not going to give any spoilers because I do not want to give any spoilers. However, I was actually quite shocked to find out that Cinderella's fairy godmother was not a fairy godmother to start out with. She was a regular, everyday human being. And something happens and she becomes a fairy godmother. Again, not going to share what it was because I fully believe everyone should have those moments of reading those things on their own. That's just my personal opinion, and I personally don't want to share any type of spoilers on my channel. But I really, really liked this, and I would definitely recommend reading this book. Like I said, there is a second book being released, or that's already been released, that I want to read at some point this year. Apparently, it talks about how Tinkerbell became Tinkerbell, how she meets Peter, why she's in Neverland, etc. And yeah, I definitely want to read that one. I don't know if there's any other books in the series outside of the two that I am obviously talking about that have been, I don't know if there's any other books that have been released, but anyway, those are the two that I know. This one and then the one I'm talking about is the only one that I know of. But I'm really, really excited to continue the series. There also is another book series about like the Disney villains that I am kind of interested in. One of the book accounts that I do follow, she has read most of them, and she says that you have to read them in you have to read them all in order, because apparently one villain story kind of leads into another villain story. And she did say that some of the books can be a little bit darker, so I'm definitely going to have to do some research on that, because I'm not really into that type of stuff. I prefer more like lighthearted type stuff. That's just me. Everyone has their own personal preferences. But yeah, like I said, that might be another series that I read at some point here. So yeah, I hope that this video was enjoyable for anyone who is possibly interested in reading this series, or maybe this is a series that you want for your kids, whatever it may be. I really liked it, and I would highly recommend this book.